Cast your mind back to 2021. NFTs are booming. Digital art is booming. But where were the film people? Would they follow along? Well, now they have. Film is in my DNA. It's where I started. It's the thing that I love more than anything else. And to see projects move into this space with a heritage in working on the biggest films out there. We're talking the likes of The Lord of the Rings, Weta. That's what's happening right now. Today I'm talking to Steven Ilous from Feature and Ben Mauro, the creative genius behind Huxley. These are projects slow in gestation with a huge amount of experience behind them from the film industry. But the film industry, Marvel Cinematic Universe, it is the way we experience cinema, pop culture right now. It is driving everything that we know about taking intellectual property from comic books and bringing it to life to a mass audience. And this is exactly what's happening now in a Web3 context. So this conversation, it crosses all sorts of different things, from being an indie artist, from the struggle, from being in a CG artist sweatshop, to being sole creator and sole owner of your own destiny. It's a fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy. There are a few platforms that put security first while helping you make the most out of your crypto. On Nexo, you can buy crypto with a card in seconds and automatically start earning interest paid out daily. If you want to restructure your portfolio when the time comes, jump on Nexo's instant exchange and get rewards on every swap. Borrowing against your crypto without selling is easy with rates starting at 0%. Nexo is the place for your crypto where you can securely buy, earn, exchange, borrow, and store your assets through the market cycles. Visit nexo.io and play the long game right. So it's my great honor and privilege to welcome Ben Mauro, the creative genius behind Huxley, and Steven, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ilous?
Ilous, yeah, close enough.
Ilous, the head honcho at Feature, who have presented some tech solutions, just so many interesting things. And we have so much to talk about with the Degen trilogy, of course, with Love, Death, and Robots as well. But two heroes of mine from the Web3 space, creating IP, leveraging that IP, welcome. And I'm so happy to have you guys on to talk about what you're building. Ben, welcome.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thank you.
First question, Ben, Huxley, when did it begin? Tell us.
Well, I've been drawing things in the universe probably as far back as 2008. Some of the robots you see walking around in the markets are as old as 2008. The Huxley character didn't get drawn until probably around 2014. And I was really set on, okay, there's something here. I need to start turning this into something. And that really got me thinking about turning into something bigger than just some drawings and passion for creating things in a certain style.
I think it's difficult for people to appreciate where the creative industries were back in 2014. Can you give us a picture of like what Instagram was, what Vimeo was, where you were showcasing your work? What was it like to be an artist trying to dream big like you were back in those days?
Oh God. Yeah, it was a different world, huh? I mean, Instagram was just probably kind of getting started back then. Like it was very early. Like I think iPhones were very early. Like I think I just got iPhone 2 or something. Like we just were able to take photos with our phone. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then Instagram was pretty early. Like, wow, I can take photos. I can put these blurry photos on this social media platform. Yeah, it was super early, huh? A lot of it though was just, we were in the system we were in. Like I was in the film industry back then. I was in New Zealand working at Weta and Hobbit and stuff. And just kind of the realities of like, I'm down here, I'm learning things, working with directors and artists I admire. But at the end of the day, I'm still building stuff for them. I'm using my creativity and building all these things for them. And the only way out of that, in my mind, was to invest in myself and create my own things that would hopefully one day be able to be turned into something else, like the thing I was working on, right? Like J.R.R. Tolkien spent his whole life writing The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and all these different books. He passed away. Those rights go to his family. His family is licensing out those rights to keep creating films to allow their father's legacy to continue on. And the director is making a film based off that, and I am an employee at this company working on this movie of this whole thing that has existed, right? So you can't expect a whole lot under those circumstances, and being so far down the chain, working on this thing that has all these other things going on. So again, just my thoughts on getting out of that was just investing in myself and hopefully one day creating something that could become something like that.
It's so funny because I grew up in Oxford. My father was an English professor at Oxford. And he always used to point out the pub that J.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who was another great sci-fi fantasy writer, they used to sit and get absolutely hammered and just figure out what orcs were and what, like those crazy trees, the Ents. That was because they were just smashed in a pub drinking, fine ale. But that's Oxford, Oxford was just like a culture of just sit in a pub, figure out the mysteries of the universe while drunk and wearing tweed jackets. That's where I grew up. And it's so funny having this conversation with you now. You specifically referenced that. What was it that you were doing? Were you a 3D modeler? Were you in CGI? What was your platform of choice? Were you a Maya guy? Were you a Cinema 4D guy? Where were you at that point?
Pencil and paper, actually, at the beginning. So I was just drawing on paper with a pencil, painting it in Photoshop at the beginning. But then once you get in the film industry, you quickly see how much of an arms race it is. And then, there was a funny story at Weta where like I was experiencing this and I was talking to some of the older guys and they were like, oh, when I started, it was just like colored pencils on paper. And then it was like pencil on paper. And then the moment someone brought in a colored pencil, the director immediately went to the colored pencil and ignored all the pencil drawings. And then the moment someone brought in the sculpture with clay, he ignored all the colored pencil drawings and went immediately to the clay drawings. It was like this never ending, like whatever the new thing is, the clients are most interested in, and they kind of forget about all the old stuff. And my experience with that was the moment someone started using ZBrush, they ignored all the Photoshop drawings or whatever, because I guess it was always like a pursuit of like the thing I'm looking at is as close as possible to what is going to look like in the movie. And obviously a drawing has a lot more interpretation to go before it ends up being like, what is this actually going to look like? And so all these tools like ZBrush and Blender and Modo at the time and Maya and 3ds Max allowed us to get as close as possible. Like, this is what this is going to look like in your movie. Are you sure is this what you want? And so a lot of those tools help, but it also just meant we're always continually chasing the tail of whatever is new. And for me, it was probably photo bashing when I got onto Elysium. And
oh, wow. Elysium.
So that was like the
Neil Blomkamp,
one of
right?
the early, that was one of the early projects that we did photo bashing. And I think we probably started that trend in a big way in the industry of just like, once those designs got out, everyone was like, whoa, how did you do that? What is that? Wow. Like, and
that's so funny because Neil's like, he's still quite young, right? And he's held up as this kind of punk reinventor of stuff. Although I think he was just representative of a movement of a time. But that whole Cape Town, South African visual effects movement that happened down there, District 13, all this, like, it was really exciting. Dion Vorod, all that stuff, really inspiring. But like, it's funny because I feel like Elysium was like 3 years ago, but it wasn't. It was like, what, 15 years ago now, probably?
It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first times as well that like you kind of settle in on understanding how long something takes, because that was the first project I worked on from start to finish. Like someone coming to me with like a couple words on a piece of paper, say like, I'm going to write a script, but here's a rough idea, draw some robots. And then over 4 years that turned into, okay, here's the script. Okay, here's the actor that we need. Here's all the scenes I need. Now we're filming. Here's all the props that need to be built and all this kind of stuff. And so that was like a good, okay, this is how a movie is made, start to finish kind of thing. Because most of the other stuff I was like in the middle, and you're like, oh, I'm just drawing some wolf, the warg, and you need here's some orc drawings or something.
Well,
but you don't really understand the whole.
It's a very specific type of movie as well, because those highly concepted, highly storyboarded visual effects heavy movies, they take a lot of time. It's more akin to animation than it is to live action. Whereas you can take a smartphone and shoot Tangerine in a weekend if you wanted to. So movie making is this whole spectrum, and people are always like, well, why can't you just shoot it and make it? It's like, no. Steven, you have a long history background in movies. How did you find Ben? How did you guys meet each other? You're muted, my friend. You're muted. The film vet doesn't understand microphones.
Funnily enough, through social media, I believe. Like, we had mutual friends that had been working in the film business, and I was coming from more of, at that point in my career, writing and directing. So there are always so many great artists that I'm like, oh my gosh, their work is amazing. I would love to work with them at some point. And I ended up working with a guy that goes by the name of Heavy Polly. And I don't remember if that was the direct connection, Ben, or if it was Rari. It was, just a small group of like.
You say Rari, you mean Rari Joseph?
Robinson.
Rari Robinson, the Irish dude. Yeah. Who built robots. Yeah, I remember him. Vimeo stars. Oh my gosh. Yes. Going back.
Yeah. So like around that time, that's when I was kind of really taking some of the work that I'd done in post-production and smashing it together with the writing and directing that I was doing and building these trailers. And then just pushing them out to the world. And that's kind of when you started to collect some of these other filmmakers that you're like, okay, I see what you're doing. They'd go viral, they'd be in Wired magazine or up against like Star Wars, and Hollywood would call you and be like, we want to make your movie. And then you'd go and it'd be like some, crazy process to like actually do that. But yeah, that's how Ben and I connected, through social media.
Yeah, there was a whole period around then where people would post stuff on Vimeo, VFX heavy, like concepts and things, and then suddenly they would be directing a feature film. They're like, but how do you get there? And like some of them got really stung by it, and some of them made it stick. But Ben, where were you at this point? Were you thinking, I'm ready to do Ben Mauro? Were you still reticent? What was your journey into becoming like creator, owner of your own IP destiny?
It was probably during the Weta years when I was down in New Zealand. And I think a lot of it was just like figuring out like, because I'm very like independent person, but a lot of my time was just like, well, I have to go work for someone because that's just the way it is. And just me trying to like, I'm always very curious, like, how do I do things on my own? Like, how does this work? I think even at the time, like when I left Weta, I really wanted to travel because I had been at a desk for so many years. And I felt like the only way to fill up my visual library was with like real life experiences. And I just felt like I needed that experience to like become the artist I needed to be. And I wasn't going to get that Googling things anymore. And so I just needed that experience. And it was like, well, how the hell am I going to do that? Because like work from home and like freelancing was very rare at the time. Like, no, you got to be in-house. You need to come here and work for us. And so I was able to find a way to freelance on Call of Duty. And I guess because that was such a big project, they were less strict about it. And there's just so many people needed to work on these games. And I was able to lock in a freelance job on a giant project like Call of Duty that was many years of work. And I just kind of sold all my belongings and lived out of a backpack for probably like 3 years and just traveled and worked and stuff. But again, this kind of kept my curiosity going. Like, okay, I figured this out. Now I just I want to like see the world. And while I was traveling, a lot of the Huxley started to come up where it's like, okay, I was thinking about how I wanted to do this, but it was always like, once this job is done, I'll take 6 months off and work on my project. And I just found that was never going to happen because a new job would always come in that was cooler than the last. And then I have to do that. After that, then I'll work on my thing. And it just became a thing of like, there's never going to be a time. I just need to do it now. So I just found a way to like, okay, I'm going to page one. I know what page one looks like. And I just started and figured out a way to multitask. But I think a lot of it was just things like that, where it was like me figuring things out to kind of change my life in a certain way. And then thinking bigger, like, well, what if I did this? Maybe I could do that. Maybe I could do both of these things at the same time, but it was always very much a long-term, just seeing how long it took just to make one movie. I just knew it was going to be a very long-term thing, at least like 10 years, maybe 5 to 10 years to like finish something. And I just kept putting my time into myself, and until eventually it was getting closer, almost finished. And yeah.
I think one of the hard thing though is when you work in primarily digital, the tools evolve so quickly that your initial ideas, you probably look at them and go, wow, that's like, I could do this so much better now. The texture is so much better. The lighting, particularly the rendering engines, are so much better. Do you find yourself going back and revisiting old things, or can you just bring them in and they sort of just work under the new conditions?
Well, part of the initial spark for Huxley was because I wanted to do something more old school, because I was so sick of doing all these new techniques for clients. Because like, say like photo bashing, that was great to solve problems on a movie, but I didn't feel like an artist, right? I just felt like I was going in a magazine and cutting out other people's pictures and like gluing them together and be like, here, is this what you want? You know, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. And so Huxley to me originally was just like, I want to go home and do something that makes me feel like an artist, which meant drawing things on paper, painting them. Like I created every single thing, pixel in this image directly from like my brain. So like that character, every line, every shape is 100% me. And it wasn't like, oh, I found some cool engine photo and that's like the robot or something. So a lot of the initial stuff was just doing it old school, like my like heroes like Mobius and Juan Gimenez and Atomo and stuff. And Atomo's drawings are never going to be like dated, right? Like you can go back in 100 years and be like, damn, that's a good drawing. Like, yeah, that's amazing. And so for me, that was like, I wanted to do something like that. Later on, I did end up using some 3D tools and things like Blender to like build out some bigger scenes. But at that point, the style was pretty set and I could just try to keep it consistent. And there were some earlier things that I did have to go back to, but mainly just because more of like, because I did it chronologically, like I created a enemy robot, for example. And once I got to maybe like page 30, where there was like this mutant gangster. And when I designed him, I was like, damn, that's so much cooler than my main enemy, my main bad guy. So I had to go back and make him look scarier. It was more like sculpting this giant thing in a way, but less so about like, oh, that looks dated. It was more of just like from a story design standpoint.
Yeah, there's this thing I always say, that there's the artisan as the artist. The artisan is extremely good at working to a brief, delivers exactly what you want, and goes home on time, or sort of on time. And then the artist is a masochist and will work weekends, evenings, and hate everything they create, but it's completely unique and wonderful. And I think it's very difficult to apply that thinking or that idea to filmed arts. We're very comfortable with that when it comes to sculpture and art and painting and these kind of things, but digital art and things that come from comic books have never had that filter applied to them. But what you're talking about is exactly that. It's the idea of suffering for your art, that every single pixel came out of your head. We live in a time where I can press a button and instantly I'm Tom Cruise. There's a filter for everything. It's easy. It's just like convenient. Now I can create. You're old school though. You come from a different vibe, which is, if I didn't make it, it's not honest. Is that kind of where you're at?
I think maybe not in all ways, but like for my personal work, at the start of that, that was very much my feelings of just like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything anymore. I don't feel like I created anything. Like, so maybe I just needed to get it out of my system. Like I was quite young and pretty like strict about things. Like I want to have, I don't know, there's like a big checkbox in my mind of like things I want to do. And I needed to check that box off before I could move forward, I guess, creatively. But yeah, I mean, I talked to Steven about this a lot, where like, especially with AI coming in for art, we're probably going to be the last generation that actually did things like that. Like all kids growing up now will have access to AI and stuff where it was like, you can just type in words and get pictures now. And why should I learn how to draw? That's too slow. Like, why would I spend 20 years learning how to get good at drawing on paper. Like, who cares? I'll just type in a couple paragraphs and now I have 1,000 drawings or paintings. And it's like, it's going to be a whole different world of the next generation growing up.
But you know, I have a different view on that, which is when everything is easy and accessible to everybody, those who don't do it stand out more. And so in the same way that there are vinyl enthusiasts and people preserve vinyl records, I have vinyl records. I don't know why I keep them because I don't have a vinyl player, but I love the fact that, you know, there's a picture on the cover of a music video that I did. It means something to me. People will still paint because it will represent a very strong position in opposition to the immense over digitalization of everything that we experience. And I think the more we move into the metaverse, the more that stuff will become important. And I had an interesting chat with Chris Lee from Artifact about this, that he believes that the metaverse will be the single greatest driver of people seeking out nature and more natural experiences than we've ever seen in our lifetimes, which I thought was profound and interesting. And it's a deeply optimistic view of the world. And I want to flip back to you, Steven, now. You're looking at this singular artist creator. What did you see in Huxley that made you think, wow, there's something here that I can take and run and turn into something really exciting?
I think with Ben, it was, I mean, obviously he's an amazing concept artist and always had wanted to work with him anyway. Whether that was having him do designs for a project I was doing, a film or whatever. But when I found out that he had spent 10 years in really putting himself through the fire to deliver something that he knew what would be a part of his legacy, it really reminded me of Stan Lee, to be honest. And when I worked with Stan when I was younger, I understood what that world building was like and saw how Stan really tried to approach generational IP. And so seeing it with Ben, and then when I read it, Ben was like, make sure you put Mad Max on when you read it. So I had Mad Max blaring while reading this comic book. And I remember that moment where it just hit me. I'm like, this can be the Web3 Star Wars, where it's this massive sprawling world, a great story, wonderful characters, visually unique, and really someone living and dying on the page. That's how I look at it. Like you could tell there's heart, his heart is in it, and there's soul. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to launch my company and I want to prove that you can disrupt a traditional model, why not do it with this wonderful piece of property that's already has 10 years invested into it, a wonderful concept artist who is well respected within the industry and has been responsible for multi-billion-dollar IPs, right? And we both share that kind of sentiment of like, well, sometimes you just got to do it yourself, right? Like working on the projects I have as well. And, we just kind of really aligned in terms of work ethic as well. Like it's not done until it's done, right? And hitting that certain quality level. And then just combining that and obviously fundamental trust and knowing that there's a bigger objective here, which is proving to a bigger system that you can do this on the blockchain and it can be viable. And so I think the sum of its parts really led us to where we are now with Huxley.
How did you pitch it to Ben? I can imagine Ben was probably at some point fairly, what's the right word, skeptical about blockchain? What was that like?
Well, I mean, actually, Ben was already a fan of blockchain. He knew obviously, Ben, you can answer this question, but the way to answer the first part, which was how did I pitch it to Ben, was ultimately the larger vision of what Feature really is we have an opportunity here to quickly incubate projects, minimum viable product, whatever that is. Like if it's a comic book, if it's a video game, if it's a short film, whatever that you can get out that expresses the idea in a singular way that conveys to the audience, this is what this is going to feel like, or this is what the world is. And then minimum viable community. And the idea would be to incubate more of these types of projects. Creators are dying for these types of distribution methods where they can quickly create a community and launch a product. And so Ben saw the vision in that. And we had, it took a while to really get to the place where it was like, okay, here's my project that I've been working on for 10 years. Let's go do this together.
And Ben, for you, clearly a very precious piece of content, IP. Where was your head at? Were you thinking this is going to be a film? Is it going to be a comic book? Where had you, in your kind of wildest dreams, what did success look like for Huxley, let's say 3-4 years ago?
Well, at the time, I mean, the comic took so long to make. So the first product was always going to be a comic that I hope to expand into films and games and novels and all this kind of, basically every content category, like all my favorite franchises and things. But once I was getting close to finishing the comic, and I spent a year with a small team adapting it into a cinematic trailer so that I just had all the pieces ready, right? Because I knew how Hollywood works. So it was like, okay, I know if I just have a comic and go to a meeting, they're going to be like, nice art, kid, but what would this look like as a movie? And this is what it looks like. And so I just knew all the like doubts that happen when you take things forward. And I just tried to like finish all those before I launched. And I was kind of getting to the point where the comic was done, the trailer was done, and I had started dipping my toes into NFTs and blockchain, and enough so that I was like, I think this is how I want to launch kind of my life's work. And I know a lot of people, if they worked on something 10 years, they would think that's crazy. Like, I'm going to risk everything on this new thing that is kind of just happening in this moment. And so it was kind of a risk, but I just kind of went for it. And I think a lot of it was, I talked to many companies when I was thinking about how do I launch this into this new space. And most of them were very much like, let's just dump this in a second and then we'll bail on you and then we'll go to another project. And I was like, well, that's not, why would I do that? Like, why would I spend 10 years of my life and then you guys just dump my thing into a market and then leave? And so when I talked to Steven, a lot of the conversations were very much, here's how you build a real IP. And it aligned perfectly with what I was thinking. And that seemed like a much better path. And just the path you have to take if you want to build a real thing. Because you can't just like imagine if someone just like dumped the script of Star Wars and then bailed on George Lucas. And then he's like, well, what the hell? Like, what? Like, that's not how you make a movie. That's not how you create something long-term,
Well, it's funny you should say that, because this is what happens pretty much every day in Hollywood and has done for the last 50 years. The great creative artists come up with something and it just gets killed. One of my best friends was in the adaptation of The Dark Tower. That went to pilot. Amazon picked it up. They spent a fantastic amount of money on it. It will never see the light of day. I really want to see it. But it's on a shelf somewhere. Just oh yeah, we're doing Lord of the Rings instead. That's it. Done. 3 years of just work and then no. And I think it's the path that you're beating now is the path that others will come and follow. And what's interesting about what you're doing is that it feels very much born out of movies, the feature film industry, and grounded in the knowledge and the experiences you've had from that space. Whereas a lot of what I think people see in Web3 is degenerate, it's quick turnaround, it's low effort. This is the exact opposite. If it's high effort, it's built to last, to be, a generation spanning piece of IP. But that's quite old school and it's quite a hard sell, I think, to youngsters in Web3. So, I mean, for you, Steven, how do you pitch this? How do you conceptualize it? Where is the audience for what you're building?
Wow, there's several good questions in there. Where is the audience for what we are building? I think there's several forms of expression with Huxley that tap into different audiences. And I think that's indicative of all great intellectual property, is that you can take them and create extensions of them that tap into the current zeitgeist. So if you think about Star Wars, I have a Kith Star Wars shirt, right? How did Star Wars enter street culture, right? it just becomes one of these things that look at Akira, for example. It was what it was at the time, and it grew to this legacy, and now it's entered into this this place where you can repurpose content from it in a way that makes it very current. So I think of it like great IP will always find its way. Watchmen being listed as like one of the best graphic pieces of American literature of all time, right? And you read the comic book and you're like, yeah, it's a great comic book. At the time, that's probably what people thought as well. And it won awards, but like it continues to find a way to come back into the conversation. And I think that's the idea with great intellectual property, is that it finds its core audience and then it continues to be adapted and evolved in ways that, look at superhero movies right now. Regardless if you're tired of them or not, they're still in the conversation. And when were they really made?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like one of my favorite graphic novels is The Crow. And, the original movie that got made, they've been trying to remake it for donkey's years. And it seems to have this curse around it. But you read the original graphic novel, you're talking about Ben's pain coming out through that. Literally the birth of The Crow is just in a place of extreme pain. And it's scrappy and weird, but it feels so good. Feels so good as a thing. Like at some point, I'd love to be the guy that remade it. But, this concept of IP and how we leverage it seems very dry. I'll be honest. It seems very legalistic and dry and sort of old school. And yet every time I think about this space and what we're doing here and the conversations I have with you, you realize how important it is. And how do we switch people on to the value that they're creating and what they can do with it, and how important it is to do what Ben's done and take your time and really treasure it and safeguard it?
I think, I don't think I've said the word IP as much in my life in this last year. I was talking to two judiciary committees for two senators who are trying to pass new laws, basically in intellectual property. They're doing the research right now, but ultimately it'll have an impact on NFTs, trademark, copyright. And I'm looking, at the conversation going like, how am I in this room? Little imposter syndrome at that moment. But ultimately what I realize is that because of the provenance of the blockchain, because you have the security, because you actually can prove verifiable ownership in a digital space now, it really has thrust the concept of like, well, what do I own as an artist? I, as a writer director, going through the process of Hollywood and being like, wait a minute, that sounds like my movie that I pitched you guys, right? You pick up the phone and you call your attorney. Every creator has this moment. You pick up your phone, you call their attorney, and they're like, well, did they read the script? Was there access? And you kind of go through the legal list of like, what does it mean to actually own something? And you're like, well, you don't own your idea, you own the expression. So all of these things, like, you end up learning the hard way in Hollywood. But I think what's great about the blockchain right now is people are learning it early on because they're like, well, do I give rights away? Is there added utility because I gave them the rights? So I think the conversation is healthy, especially as people are creators and they're building things, and they should understand what they are building and how to create legal rails that could ultimately monetize their work in new ways. And that's what I think is exciting. It is a little dry. It can be like, but I do think that we are building a digital economy here, and there are going to be new novel ways that we can monetize this. And that's the important part of the conversation.
So Ben, you are building out all sorts of different expressions of Huxley. Can you tell us what some of those are and what we can expect from the Huxley property?
Sure. I think I want to go back a little bit, but like back to it's kind of boring, but like that is how you make something. Like I spent 10 years of my life not going outside, not hanging out with friends. Like you have to put in the time to create something, right? And most of that is pretty boring. It's just me sitting at a desk, thinking about things, working all night. Like it's not sexy. It's not exciting. It's just like, you got to put in the work. And I think like all the heroes, like, Otomo and Miyazaki and all these guys who've created these, like, especially like animated films where you see their life, and they did that for their whole life, not just a couple of years. Right. And they're not out on the internet bragging about the next thing they're going to do. They're not, they're just quiet, working on their next masterpiece. And that's not sexy. That's not whatever in the digital age, but like those are the people that I admire the most, that just put their time where their mouth is or whatever. They're just like committed fully to like squeezing their existence into their work. And that, again, that's not a very sexy thing to most people, but like to me, that is just like the most admirable personal trait to have as a artist and creator. Is just like, we spent all our life gaining these skills, and it's kind of our duty to create these new things that will live on far after we're gone. And to me, that's like the greatest artistic achievement, and kind of just, again, kind of our duty as creators to leave behind these new things that never existed before. And I see that like that's like a lifelong pursuit that I can do every day, and wake up and be happy to go after that goal. And so to Huxley, the next steps are, continuing to expand everything. We've got 2 more comics to release. The next CG trailer is about to go in production. That's a prequel to the comic book. There's a few more short films that I'm beginning production design on. Ari Rod and Jerome Chen are producing a feature film based off the comic, and they're doing their thing right now. And working on novelization of some of the prequel stories. So I'm not sure if those will end up being more of a traditional novel or maybe turned into more graphic novels. I'm still just deciding on that. And working on vertical slices of video game content to see what might be a really cool gaming experience. And probably a few other things I'm forgetting, but yeah, just pushing it on every single content category.
It sounds exhausting, but I mean, I guess it's building the universe in this very broad base, but I guess you've been doing it for 10 years. But I mean, give people a sense of how long it takes. For instance, you talked about CG trailer, from just starting work on it to delivering it. How long does that take?
The first one was about a year, but that was because it was like 6 people, all very multi-talented, and we all did it kind of sort of like the comic, like we did it in our downtime in between jobs. The next one will be working with a bigger studio, and that's the timeline. That's probably 5 months will be, and it's about the same, maybe the same scope and length as the other one, but that's working with a much bigger studio. And but it just depends on the length of all the different shots you're trying to achieve, the different studios schedules. And so there's a lot of moving parts and factors on this. Yeah.
Interesting. So Steven, you recently announced a very interesting thing. We were talking about distribution when you and I first talked, and you were like, I got something exciting to tell you. I can't talk about it, but it's going to be really, really, really exciting. And then it was like, damn, son, tell us about the box.
The box.
The box.
It's funny that we call it the box, because it's like, from the imagery, which we're going to have new stuff coming out to show people. It's actually 4 by 4 inches. I have the prototype here in front of me.
That's like basically like an Apple TV. Oh, you almost saw it there. Spoiler, it's black. It's black.
It's thinner than an Apple TV. It has a higher GPU than an Apple TV. It's got a lot more, at this point, it has a lot more plugs than an Apple TV, but that will be stripped away. It's just kind of our working prototype. So we have more access to it. But ultimately, it is the first blockchain-enabled streaming device. And the reason that we wanted to do a blockchain-enabled streaming device was because there really are no other options. How do you distribute Web3 content with everyone building Web3 content, but there's no way to really do that aside from your desktop?
Well, there's people building token frames and all these other things, which feel like they're trying to solve a problem that isn't actually a problem, because you've already invested, pretty much everyone, in a high resolution, very capable, smart display in your home, and it's called your television. Mm-hmm. And it's like you already have it. So why do you need to buy like a bespoke frame with a cable hanging off it that you hang on the wall and looks weird and won't necessarily fit everything you want? What was your thinking? Because I think your phrase is bringing the metaverse to the couch. Is that right?
To the living room. That's
To the
right.
living room,
Same thing. Yeah. Web3 to the couch, metaverse to the living room. Both of them apply. I mean, why is it that the largest screen that we all have in our home isn't that smart, even though we call them smart TVs, right? I feel like the ecosystems are so fragmented between the phone and the integration of like, all of them come with Alexa now and Google, whatever, Apple TV. They have their preloaded software on them, and it's just a really bizarre, fragmented experience. And so we wanted to take the best of Web3 and how we interact on the desktop with social media, the conversations that take place, and ownership, and bring that to the television in a very clean, sleek, forward-thinking environment or UI of how we actually want to see and interact with content, which is less is more, form of minimalism, and really create a experience that, however singular it can be with entertainment, where you just want to be able to watch something by yourself, we wanted to be able to bring in the conversation of a community that you're a part of. So why can't premieres be exciting with all your fans, right? Or everyone that you can't wait to go watch Star Wars. I remember waiting in line to go see a movie, and the excitement that's there, that's part of the experience. We've lost that. And so I want to bring that back into the equation with content, community, and really blockchain enabled content. So, yeah.
I was looking at the new version of Zapper this week, and what struck me was what they've built is effectively Yahoo from 1996. It's the front page of the web, but the front page of Web3. And it feels so odd to be saying that, but why didn't we have it before? It's like a discovery page where you've got DAOs and NFTs and DeFi presented in a clickable, discoverable way where you go, oh, what's this? What's this? And I feel like all this amazing content, it doesn't need to be viewed through OpenSea. It needs to be viewed through a different kind of experience. And when you told me about the set-top box, I was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. But now you have the challenge of putting the content on the device, which is why we had Ben here as well, because Ben's content will be on the device. But I'm trying to figure out what that content is and what else you've got lined up to go on the device as well.
Well, so that's what's really exciting is that we currently we'll be making a bunch of announcements on our launch partners. Like any great device, you want to have great experiences. And we think that we can really pioneer in what people say is watch to earn, watch to own, proof of viewership, learn to earn. So bringing in educational components into this. So I look at every vertical of television, from food and lifestyle to just general news content, and how do we create deeper, richer experiences. And so we did the campaign for Love, Death, and Robots with Netflix, where we actually embedded our QR code technology into the content. And what we ended up seeing was that people really wanted to engage with it. You showed them something, or you gave them the ability to connect with their television or the content, and they did it. We had over 100 million page views, 138,000 mints. And what it showed us was the long tail does exist for content. So even though the credits roll, people want to find a way to engage. And that's what I love about Huxley is that, it is a comic book, it is a story, but we want to explore that. We want to find ways that we can continue to engage. And we've built this wonderful community who I know would appreciate these types of experiences. So we have about 20 launch partners at this point, with a wide range, as I said, from gaming. So we actually have mini games and metaverse experiences, educational, food, and lifestyle, action, adventure, race car shows. So what's cool about these is they all kind of connect into the blockchain in unique ways. So I can break down some of those. But what I'm really excited about is the discoverability component here, right? That just like OpenSea is an aggregator, which most people don't know that. These are just projects that are contracts that are published to the blockchain, and it's putting a GUI on them and allowing you to interact with that contract. I mean, it's really not that crazy, but we want to do the same thing. And once the box matures slightly, we'll be able to open that throttle enough to allow any creator, any developer to build their own dApp that can exist on this box.
So what's going on inside it? is there a game engine in there? What? I mean, it's a mini PC basically.
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's a 4K capable, Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, GPU enabled ARM processor. So it is a Apple TV killer, but it's open enough, and the operating system that we use is a great language that we think is very stable, Linux, and we're able to build upon this box and create a unique experience that is not so centralized compared to the others.
No, well, that's the key to it, isn't it? Because we're so accustomed to having these almost ridiculously easy experiences around content. I mean, I try and explain to my kids what it was like going to a shop and buying a plastic disc on which there were 7 songs, and they look at me like, "Why would you do that?" Like, no, we had a much better thing where we had a ribbon. And on that ribbon, we could record things, and then that ribbon would break, and we'd have to take a pencil and wind it back in. They're like, "Why would you do that?" It's like, oh my god! But it's if in Web3, I think we often feel like we're designed to live in poverty, that things should be hard and expensive and not function like things we're accustomed to. But these devices bridge, right? They get us closer to that. And I think that's really exciting. You did mention, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, that there might have been a certain game engine that might be installed on this device. Is that a rumor? Is that true? Can you confirm, deny?
I can confirm that it is GPU capable enough to run one of the best video game engines in the world, and the operating system. But we'll have more information on that. We're really excited about being able to leverage GPU and narrative and blockchain simultaneously on a device. Like that's the fun part here, and that's why we're launching with a key group of creators and game companies and different partners, because we want them to explore. Like, this is like, how do we create that magical feeling of Nintendo, but now with everything else that we have, community, the blockchain, that you actually own that character that's dynamically changing based on what you have in your wallet, and is a unique experience that's still directed by somebody. But for you and for I, it's a different experience because of what we have in our wallet. Like, there's so many new ways that we can play here. And I think it really is one of the most exciting times of my life, in my mind, because I haven't seen this type of creative freedom and the ability to connect with the community as direct.
Ben, do you feel that way? Do you feel like you are liberated, that you have freedom? Or does it still feel like the grind and the masochism is driving you?
That's always the grind. I'm addicted to the grind. The grind will never disappear and only get more, I think. But I think for me, the biggest part is just like, the creative freedom. And because, right, thinking about like the avenues I had before Web3, it was like, okay, I have to go to a publisher to get this out there. They're the big gatekeeper. They'll probably take all my rights. I won't have anything anymore. I spent 10 years and then everything just gets taken from me immediately. For the opportunity that my work gets published and maybe something might happen, right? And then if maybe it gets turned into a film, whatever publisher took all my rights, they do all that and they take it again. And
then your manager and your agent.
And then it's like, okay, there's a movie off my comic and everything's been taken from me from the beginning. And so that was the options that existed before. And with Web3, I can sell my product directly to consumers who think it's really cool. There's no more like gatekeepers and things. And now that we're going back and engaging with those, we're just in a much better position where it's like, well, I don't need that. Like, I'll see you in a year or whatever, right? Like, I'll just go do it myself, like in a position where I can just fund things and create things the way they should be created and not have to maybe compromise and take bad deals just because there's no other option. But we created that other option, right? Or this other option created itself in Web3, and it's opened up avenues that I think most creators have dreamed about their whole careers. And I think it's a pretty incredible moment.
It is. One of the funny things is that when you're early to a space like this, or early to a movement like this, you reap the most rewards from it. You gain the most notoriety. There's the most ready capital to deploy on fewer projects. So you gain the most from it. Do you find yourself being precious about it? Or do you evangelize freely to fellow creatives and say, come play here, it's awesome? Because I would imagine there's a feeling that actually I should keep this to myself, because if I spread it too far and wide, it will dilute the pool, and then the benefits will go away and they won't accrue to me.
Well, at the beginning, I told everyone, and most people I knew told me to shut up. They told me it was stupid. They told me I'm an idiot. So I tried, I think I felt like in my whole life, I've always tried to help everyone. And it's always resulted in people being mad at me or something like this. So I still try at the beginning, but it usually, again, the same thing here is just like, you're stupid, you're an idiot, what are you doing? But some listened, but most of them, it was like a very negative reaction. I was like, okay, I tried, and I have to go get back to work now. But it was like, I still always try to spread the word to everyone. But at the end of the day, it's like, people are going to do what they're going to do, and I have to get back to work, kind of thing. But I do try. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? There's always that thing where it's the guy clapping someone else getting the award in an award ceremony. It is like, that feeling is like, oh God.
But back to like what you said about like being at the beginning, because when I was in the middle of Huxley, I would go to Comic-Cons and I would talk to like a lot of amazing comic book artists who were, they were at the beginning of the comic book craze. And I'd be like, kind of like asking them questions that I would have to be dealing with in a couple of years. Like, hey, when you published your comic, like, how did that work? And like, was it good working with this publisher? And they were like, yeah, I wouldn't go with the publisher anymore. Like, I got a crazy deal because I was at the beginning, but you're going to get screwed now. And it's like, okay. But like, that was the response from like 100% of all the old school comic book artists that I talked to, who I was like, I want to make something like what you did. And they're like, yeah, don't go with the publisher anymore, man. There's like indie publishers. There's so many other options. And like, so like I was getting these warning signs from the old guard of that industry while I was in the middle of finishing. So I was like, okay, I got to figure something out. I don't know what it is, but I'm still not done yet. So I don't have to worry about it. But like, once I got to the close of being finished with mine, it was like the avenue presented itself, and just kind of had to go for it.
Yeah. Steven, you were about to say something. I jumped in on you.
Oh no, I think I was just going to say like, it has changed, right? Even in the last year and a half, I think there's been it has evolved. So if people were to come in and be like, I'm going to do a comic book just like Huxley, I would be very cautious of like just coming in and being like, I'm going to use NFTs to fund the creation of a comic book and then build a community around it and figure out the story along the way. I think the main reason I say that is because I do believe there is oversaturation, and projects similar to the entertainment industry move in waves, right? Like when I first started in Hollywood, I was off sync. I'd be like, I want to do a horror movie. And they're like, yeah, no one's buying horror movies. And then you would finally get ahead of the curve where you're like 2 year into a cycle where you're like, yeah, I'm working on this horror picture or a science fiction film. And they're like, okay, what's it about? And then you caught that development cycle where then all of a sudden everybody was looking for science fiction. And I think that's there are going to be cycles to this on the creative side of the blockchain, where we're going to be seeing movements of performance-based PFPs, or what we're really excited about is kind of like spycraft PFPs or spycraft kind of blockchain projects, and puzzles and leveraging like whodunits, things like that, but more performance based. So I don't know, these things will move in cycles. And I think comic books right now are a little bit, I think there have been a lot of derivatives that we've seen. There are only very few standouts that I can say like they really put in the effort. There was a lot of love there. They were trying to deliver a real product, build a real community, and had a real objective here of like growing something. Most of them felt like some of them felt like cash grabs. So Waves. I think that these things come in waves, and just, identifying what's the story that you want to tell, and what's the real product. Like, it's got to be meaningful, in my opinion.
Well, you talked about horror films there.
Yeah.
You can be Blumhouse. And if people don't know the Blumhouse model, Jason Blum has basically said, I can make films for this much, get these people in, and make a shit ton of money. And kids love them. And horror is like that one staple of cinema where you go and you sit in a room with people and you get scared and then you laugh because you're laughing at yourself. It's the best thing. You have to go and see horror films in the cinema. But you can also, in the Jason Blum way, occupy your niche and become singularly fantastic at it and not give a shit about what everyone else thinks. And then people will come to you because you stuck it out. And I think that's what you've demonstrated so well, Ben, is you stuck to your vision. You haven't been swayed by this or by that or everything else because you believe in it. You love it. And the hype will come in waves. But if you're there and still there, people will come back to it and rediscover it and be really reassured that you are still there and find more value and better value as a result of it. And that's a rare thing. Have you seen Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary about? Yeah. So like if anyone hasn't seen it, go watch that film and go watch Nick Winding Refn meet his hero and unearth the treasure trove that is all the diagrams, all the sketches, all the work, the love that went into an unrealized film vision.
And was slowly picked by every other director. I love when he talks about spiritual creative warriors. I was like, that resonated. Those people in your life that you meet that you're like, I will go on that journey with you. Let's go.
and then go watch El Topo and have your mind completely blown. Oh, those guys. They were on a different planet, on a different trip. Everything was so hard back then, like 60s, 70s, making movies. Oh God. I would love to go back there and just be a fly on the wall and see, like, just watch Clint in the 70s. Just do his thing. Are you done now? Are you done? It's so good.
It's amazing with none of the technology that we have now. Think about that. Like real film, you had to get on the phone and call people, or if you were going to meet, you had to meet. Like you couldn't just like not show up. It'd be like you'd have to a restaurant and someone would be like, "There's a phone call for you, sir."
And a Rolodex. A Rolodex was this mythical thing. And like you have an agent and like you just actually go through. Oh my God, let's bring it back, man. Let's put it on the blockchain. Rolodex. Let's bring it all back. We can do it in the metaverse. Just, old school.
I don't think like gatekeeping and all like a lot of the stuff that like we say like we're solving, which we are solving some of this gatekeeping and all that. But I think it was like a product of like the technologies at the time. People were only capable of having X amount of relationships, and you had to have a Rolodex, and you're like, well, we can only pick so many projects a year. And it was an arduous process. It was paper that would get mailed, and there were mail rooms, and think about that. So like it just was really carbon intensive funnels that were like ultimately preclusive. And I think now what we're realizing is this technology is democratizing, and from the creation of intellectual property, like great films on phones or cool CG graphics, or a small team like Ben being able to build amazing trailers at like Hollywood level, like. This stuff is what is creating this explosion of creativity and the combination of ownership. And I think that's where we talk about there's no more gatekeeping or censor. We're censor free here. It's just we have better distribution tools now and better ways to make our content and better ways to monetize it.
But that's an interesting thing, though, because I think there's such a proliferation of content now. It's no longer gatekeeping that's the issue. It's curation that's the issue. It's filtering and understanding, what is good and what isn't good. And then being able to communicate your own taste, in a sense, in a way that isn't motivated by who's paying you and who's sponsoring this video and everything else. That's a real skill. And it's really hard. I know on the Defiant, we definitely have an issue sometimes. It's like, how do I make a video about something that I think is interesting, knowing full well that it probably won't perform that well in terms of the algorithm, but I still feel it should be made. Do we just run after the clicks, or do we stay true to this is interesting and I think other people will find it interesting over time? I don't know.
That's a difficult one.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about influencer network being able to impact viewership of content. And then, I don't know. I think that as I said, good content finds its way. Like if you're thinking about how do I generate this to impact this, group, maybe in a subversive way, that's compelling. But I think about, movies like Get Out, right? That if you went and you pitched, people would be like, I don't know. But then you watch that film and you realize how layered it is and how masterful. You're like, oh, this is a master of horror, like the genre. He understands how to take the past and bring it into the future and advance the conversation. That's the most important part for me, is how are we pushing the conversation? Which I think the algorithm will ultimately catch up to that.
Yeah. And it's when you take everything that the data gives you and allow that to inform your decisions, I think at that point you're fucked.
Yeah,
That's also why I didn't post anything about Huxley the whole time I was working on it. Like, because of that, like, again, like I'm anti, like kind of counter a lot of this stuff. So like I saw friends completely change everything about themselves for the algorithm, right? Like they're still amazing artists, but it was like, you could see them like, I'll get way more attention if I do this Spider-Man painting or some fan art of Zelda or something. And now it's just all that, right? And it's like, well, what is that original thing that you could have created? Like, I want to see that original thing from you. And they've just been completely, I don't know if I want to say ruined by the algorithm, but like just chasing attention instead of chasing what they really want to create. And so for me, again, like suffering for your art, like I spent almost a decade not posting the thing I was mostly working on every day, because I didn't want to be influenced by that either. Like I wanted to make something that I thought was cool and made me happy and felt right to me, and not posting an early page and be like, wow, people really like this character, I'll make him the main character now, as opposed to like, here's the story I want to tell, this is what I want to say, and not being influenced by outside attention at the beginning of the process or in the middle of the process.
Yeah. And
which I think is really important.
Yeah, it is important. And it's weirdly also important to expose yourself to outside viewpoints, but in a way that is like, well, I'm okay disagreeing with that. Mm-hmm. Fuck you. Honestly, yeah. You're wrong. Straight up, you're just wrong. When I was directing TV commercials, my the production company boss said, I much enjoy the relationships with the directors where they're prickly and they fight back. And I was always doing exactly what I was told and was delivering exactly what the client wanted. And I was like deeply unhappy because I was never in any fights. It was like, you just need to be in a fight a lot with your ideas and fighting for them. Otherwise, why bother? If they're not difficult. And then, and that's that thing when you're saying, I'm pitching a concept. Can you show us what it looks like? Well, no, it doesn't exist yet. That's the whole fucking point. It's never been made before. So how can I find a picture of it? Because it doesn't exist yet.
But I think it's again, like the duty of creators. I think it's necessary for us to do things like that without the outside influence, or else everything's just going to look the same. It's going to feel the same. When you go to a movie and you're like, I feel like I've seen this 100 times. It's like, because they were influenced by whatever the system or the outside influence, like people like this kind of movie, let's just make that kind of movie, and I feel like some bigger streaming platforms are having this problem where they're allowing the algorithm to determine the next movie they make. And it's like, wow, people really like mystery movies. Let's make 20 more mystery movies. And then they all look the same. They all feel the same. And you go on some of these sites and you're like, I feel like I'm continually watching the same movie over and over, going over again, regardless of genre. It's like, what is going on?
Yes,
because there's no one there creating something new and putting it out there, because everyone's allowing this overall thing to influence what is created next.
It's a homogenization of everything. And what you want is outliers. And outliers by their very nature are impossible to model for.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of time people don't know what they want, right?
Yeah, my Big Fat Greek Wedding. Who knew that would be a hit? Crazy Rich Asians. I think it's a terrible movie, but it was a huge hit. Who knew?
Yeah. The predictive nature of, I love that we're calling it the algorithm too, as like it's like a central figure. We have a central AI in Huxley.
It's an Eastern European oligarchy, isn't it? It's a country. You can go visit
It's a sovereign nation in international waters. You can visit it. But no, I think that like leveraging data is interesting, and I also think it is important when you're talking about aggregating a lot of content. And I do think that there's something interesting and compelling about deconstructive creation, IP creation, where you make a character and you release it to the public, and you're like, "What do you think?" And you let everybody like vote on it. Oh, that one didn't work, but you do it again, and like what that could be, because I'm a purist. I think you need to have a vision. You need to direct the ship. Kubrick was the best in saying like it's like going to war, and you're a tastemaker ultimately. And I think maintaining that vision and understanding that that's what the purest form of what you wanted to express is important. But I do think there's the complete opposite of that, which is how do you blow it up and have a bunch of people contribute, not necessarily in the story, but maybe certain parts of it, but continue to have a vision and allow people into that. I don't know. I think there's something interesting to explore there. I think it's difficult to have, to do storytelling in that way because too many cooks. It's just, but, Pixar, Disney, and a lot of these companies have always had the opinion that like, well, let's get the ideas from anybody here, because ultimately we want everyone to be able to go see this film. So you never know where a great idea comes from. And Coppola was the best at conveying this through a story about The Godfather and what ultimately happened with, kind of his career and in his filmmaking, which was The Godfather. He was so desperate to get made that he had to tell the story thousands of times to people. Like, this is what it's about. And every time he told it, it got better and better and better and better. But after he had the success of that and many other things, he stopped telling people stories, and he's just like, I'm going to go make this movie. And it impacted him. And I think that that's the difference is we can work insular, but you do have to, see if you can get your story out to know if you really know it in an elevator pitch. And, going through the Hollywood system and refining pitches and seeing how to create emotional impact or find those hooks is very important, because if you look at storytelling from a shamanistic perspective, you're trying to convey a message, ultimately. So I think it is important to publicly get the idea out.
Well, that brings us to the idea of the audience, because I think any audience is valuable and they can teach you a lot. Even if they don't understand things, why don't they understand it? And it's actually fine to make an audience uncomfortable. That's part of the journey. It's part of the process. So you were talking earlier about watch to earn, burn to earn, burn a fern. I mean, these are just kind of words. Is there anything tangible and real that we can actually apply right now to that isn't just bolting on another shitcoin?
Yeah. I mean, think about if you were rewarded for your viewership in a real meaningful way. Like I have this, the advertising thing. I think we're so bombarded by advertisements now, and we've kind of grown up with it in a way that door is really hard to penetrate ultimately. Like we know as a society now, we know what we want. It's usually word of mouth or it's through discoverability. We know what we want. We're very specific about buying it, and we want it immediately. And so I think that that advertiser model that used to be, that was the only way to really discover new product, was you were watching television or opening up a magazine, and it would show you something that you didn't really have access to. But we have so many different data points and devices now that we're constantly bombarded by it. And so what I think the new way will be, how do you bring in brands in real meaningful ways? And I don't mean product placement, but ultimately like brought to you by, right? Where they leverage that money and contribute to an experience. And then that money somehow ends up flowing back to the people that participate, right? Whether that, and I say money, that could be in-game assets. It could be digital collectibles. It could be a myriad of things. Better experiences brought to you by, right? When you go to Disneyland, there's a lot of sections that say this section of the park was brought to you by Mars, right? it doesn't take me out of my experience. It just ultimately is trying to contribute additionally to the experience by through advertising or sponsorship. And I think those are new ways that we'll be able to have sustainable models of IP creation and ways to bring in advertisers or additional experiences to the content.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to figure out how all that works. Bennett, do you find yourself thinking about the commercial aspects of what you're doing? Does that impact you at all?
Well, I think because of how things worked out with Web3, it just buys me time to like allow the right scenario to happen and not have to like, again, be forced into whatever comes. Like, oh, here's the first deal, and that's all we got right now, so we might as well take it. Whereas now I feel like it's more like, that doesn't really feel like the best path to do this. Let's make something else, or let's try something else. Like it just buys you time and creative freedom to do things the right way or in the best possible way, and not have to like, again, rush to do whatever you can, and because you don't have any other options. I always like having the door number 3, right? Like, like it's either because before, like Web 2 was just like, we are at such a disadvantage as creators, and there's no way to kind of make a living with our digital creations, and now there is. And even from the standpoint of like hiring, like artists who dived into Web3 are now like, they understand the value of their creation, and now it just gives us a lot more data points to like push back on things like, no, this is my day right now, or this is like, if you want to hire someone, it's like you finally can understand and have the data of how much your creations are worth, and it's just changed things in a lot of pretty massive ways.
That is a story we never hear. Honestly, that's a story we never hear. We hear, oh, artists are just cashing in, get rich quick. Artists are getting a bum deal. NFTs are a scam. You're the first person I've ever heard articulate it like that. And I think that's really important for people to hear. I think it's understanding.
Because even at the beginning, like I would get film jobs coming in, and this was at the beginning of NFTs, and they were like, hey, you want to work on this big thing? It's about all these robots. And I was like, that sounds really cool. And it was like, well, I just had this experience, so I can do it for my normal rate, but I get all the NFT rights. Like, no, we can't do that. And I was like, well, then you have to pay my NFT rates. And they're like, no, just the normal old. I'm like, sorry, I can't do that. Bye. Like it's either this or nothing. And they're just like, oh. And it was just like, sorry, man, can't do it anymore.
That's amazing. It's funny because in the old days,
it was literally that though. Like, no, the old rates where we take all your rights and you don't get anything. Just go back to the old one. Like, that's gone, man. Pandora's box is open.
You don't screw us. We'll screw you. No, I remember in the old days, I used to get people excited about this by saying everything we were accustomed to in creativity was always a no culture. People love to say no to you. So you apply for funding. I mean, we're like, no. And suddenly in Web3, it's a yes culture. But what you're telling me is that Web3 with its yes culture has enabled you to say no more emphatically, more powerfully, and in a more kind of confident way, which is great. So we've reversed the paradigm. Yeah. It is a no culture.
It's just more of like, because we've been stuck with no options. And I mean, that was part of what I was trying to say when I was at Weta in the early days. It's like, that was the only option we had. And there was no way to like a fine art painter could do a gallery show and sell all of his fine art paintings. A musician can make a song, and if he has one hit song, he's set, right? Like, the song is digital, he's selling it on iTunes or whatever. Like, every creative field has had an avenue to sell their content digitally, kind of except for digital artists. So like NFTs to me just finally leveled the playing field for us in a way that just didn't exist before. So maybe we made a lot of noise when all that happened, but it was like everyone had already had that avenue. Just we didn't. So that's why it was such a big moment for us. And yeah, like not just, I don't think it's an isolated experience. I've had a lot of, like when we were at NFT NYC in LA, like I met a lot of artists who dove into NFTs and like they basically quit their big VFX job because one painting they sold was more than the company was paying them in a year. Right. And it's like, well, what, wait a minute. Like, so you had me do 20 of these by lunchtime and I just sold one and it was more than you're paying me in a year. It's like, I quit. Bye. Like immediately just like, nope, I'm done. Like just an immediate thing to like, how much my time and creativity is worth and how much I was being compensated in my current job. And I don't know, it just turned, a lot of light bulbs went off, I think.
Yeah, I think people
understanding.
I don't think people necessarily understand how exploitative, particularly the VFX world, had become as well. Just the race to the bottom to produce more visual effects, cheaper, faster, across the spectrum. Painful. I know so many artists who got completely burnt out from just being driven into the floor by that machine, that factory. It's painful.
Yeah, but also like I don't. Like I keep like there's negatives to everything, but like I don't regret my time working for other people, working on film. Like all of that is training and understanding and things that I wanted to learn and get better at. And like I just feel like that's part of the equation. Like even back in like the Renaissance or something, I want to learn how to be the best painter in the world. I'm gonna go paint with Michelangelo or something, and I'm going to go paint from Sargent. I'm going to learn from these masters and I'm going to learn a skill that I can then go turn into something that I can make money with. But like, there's always kind of like that training at the beginning to like learn these skills that we want and that we need. And so I don't think any of the time is ever wasted. It's just what you do with it.
It's an apprenticeship.
Yeah. But I think the problems arise if you never leave. And I don't know. There's definitely a point where it's like I should if you have the desire to do that, just knowing that there's avenues out there for you to do that. But if you're like, I just love this, I want to do this, that's totally cool, man. Like I don't think there's like it's a bad thing to do that. But it's just there are options out there now, I guess.
Yeah. You're going to say something, Steven.
You know, to leave the institution, so to speak, and go on your own is a wonderful journey in self-discovery and you know, really what is your work worth, or how much time do you want to put into it, and you know, monetize it from there. But I'm curious about the other side of it as well now, because now we have a lot of artists independently going off and doing their artwork, entering the marketplace. I'm curious. I'm more fascinated about groups of artists coming together now, and whether that's created through DAOs or other, you know, institutions that we haven't seen yet. But those artists coming together, and because it does take a village to make something very large, right? Like a AAA game or a large movie or a franchise. Any of these things, you know, you need more people. So yeah, I'm curious to see like more of the decentralization of artists discovering the power of their own work, and then how do we leverage that collectively in a DAO to produce something bigger than our individual selves?
Yeah, I was reading Jared Dicker, who founded Poet, talking about how media companies, entertainment companies really need to think more like record labels in terms of identifying and developing talent, but allowing that talent to express itself very individually and not necessarily in this very filtered version of your brand, so that you really allow them to express themselves, and that diversity, that richness can only benefit your brand. And it feels like artists can really do something similar, express themselves as a collective. But I mean, that's not anything new. It's been happening through different art movements through the centuries, but now it's in a very digital form and easy to share form and very proliferable form. But also I think the artists have much more kind of financial and economic control over their own destinies, rather than having this weird antiquated patron system we had in the past.
I think a lot of it just allows people to, again, like with Huxley, just gives people more time and opportunities to choose the things they want to work on instead of being forced to work on things, which I think is the distinction that I was trying to make earlier. Was like, before I didn't have a choice. Like I barely have enough to pay rent and stuff. I have to take this other job because to keep keep the train moving or else I'm out on the street kind of thing. But I feel like now it just allows people to say, I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to wait till Dune 2 comes out. And I really want to work on Dune 2 because I think that's going to be just like an incredible thing that I want to be a part of. And I really don't care about the money so much, but it allows me to choose these periods of extreme work that I want to do to be part of this great artistic achievement that probably will never happen again in our lifetimes, or just comes along every 20 years, right? Like something like that. I would just be like, I don't care. I want to work on this. I'll give up a bit of my time to work on something just incredible. And I feel like that's the distinction I was trying to get at, where before we were kind of forced to we're kind of stuck. I have to work on everything or else I'm
destitute.
I'm screwed, you know? But now it's like, I really just want to work on those Dune or Lord of the Rings or whatever. And in between, maybe I don't have to worry so much kind of thing.
Yeah, the space. Yeah, the peace of mind, space. I mean, I think everyone realized during the pandemic the value of their mental health and the value of their own, the things that they cared about and they wanted to do that mattered to them. That was a great kind of magnifying glass on all of that. And it'd be interesting to see how quickly that's all forgotten or whether it will be forgotten. But certainly something has changed. And on that note, I feel it's time for us to end this conversation. So thanks, guys, for taking the time. This is really, I mean, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. We're very much from the same part of the creative space, but we should definitely do it again sometime. And I really hope that people go and check out Huxley, check out Feature. There's so much we didn't talk about, like, you know, your IP, your NFTs can be licensed on Feature. It's definitely something we're going to look at doing for ourselves here. But the IP conversation, we need to sex it up and make it less dry, because it definitely will be the path to, as Ben said, greater fulfillment, greater space, and greater choice, I think, for people who really understand how valuable that actually is. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Good to see you again.
Awesome. Take care. Okay. Bye.